Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Greetings, and welcome to African News Review. As you can see, I'm the only one on screen at the moment. She's here. Okay. Yes. Welcome to African News Review. I am Adesoji Iginla, and with me today would be Fubara, Eneli Esquire, author Your Self-Love Revolution, Kwanzaa is Celebration, host Rethinking Freedom, 99.85 FM, Killeen, Texas. She's also the co-host of Women and Resistance. Very much. Welcome, sister. Yes, the other arm is not here today. He's doing community work, as they would say. He's facilitating a premiere in New York, and so Comrade Milton will be joining us back next week. But we'll do our best in his absence. So, sister, as it's customary, news where you are.
Wow, there's so much going on that's reverberating across, from one state to another.
She's dropped off. She'll be back in a sec. While she is trying to reconnect, I would give you news from the UK. UK had its local elections, and the sitting party, the party in power, Labour, took a drubbing. In fact, they lost over 1,000 councillor seats. Reform did get some winnings, but we can't take too much. We can't read too much into their wins because it was low turnout. It was less than 30% of the general voting population. While that is the case, it also indicates that Labour is struggling and would probably have issues when the general elections is called sometime in the near future. And in line with that, the Prime Minister is under enormous pressure, which is somehow of the opinion that he should resign. But we know that might not happen because there is no credible candidate, as it were, because the Labour has truly lost its socialist zeal. It's more or less like corporate democrats in the United States. And so as long as they don't have a viable candidate, they will keep Keir Starmer in place. And so that will be the issue going forward. I would wait for the sister to rejoin us. But in the interim, I also like to add that the fallout from the elections was the fact that the Greens also got some hardcore Labour councils. So for anyone out of the United States, the council will be like your county government. And so those victories lend themselves to the BDS effort, which is if those councils want to divest from the state of Israel, they can, because for one, they control large budgets, and also the more those councils are able to do that, the more telling it is on the economy of Israel. So that is what was on the ballot. And obviously, as everybody is well aware, the issue of immigration also plays into its own appeal. But that said, I'll wait for the sister to join us, but I will go into the first story, and the first story comes from the Business Insider of Africa, and it reads, Zimbabwe compensates foreign farmers $146 million. 67 seized farms are returned after 25 years. The lead says, Zimbabwe says it was returning several foreign-owned farms that were seized during a violent land grab more than 25 years ago, paying compensation of $146 million. So the key tenets of the article are as follows. Zimbabwe is returning several foreign-owned farms. I highlighted that in a different color for a reason. Over 25 years, I'll come back to it. The transfer affects 67 properties linked to owners from Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, and former Yugoslavia. Both Black-owned 840 and white-owned 400 farms are being returned by the government. The land reform began with a forced takeover of white-owned farmlands post-independence to address historical imbalances. So the question would be, people would ask, so why should we really care? I see the sister is back. I would take the first line, which is Zimbabwe is returning several foreign-owned farms seized over 25 years ago. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. My apologies. The internet is going a little crazy.
Yes, I can.
Over
I can
here.
hear you. I can. No worries. No worries. Okay, so you got the article. What was your initial take when you read the story?
Well, my initial take is how colonialism continues to affect everything happening on the continent of Africa. That although Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, of course, as this article reflects, ownership has remained beyond unequal. And so the colonial structures have survived and continue to thrive, even though we are supposedly politically independent states. And that is a problem.
Okay.
So when I look at any time that we make agreements with people who have shown us in every way possible that they are not interested in our humanity, we turn around and get shocked when they don't follow through. So when we're talking about an agreement that Britain made to basically return the land, to support that effort, and that, of course, now they've reneged on it, like, is anyone truly surprised by that? The question is, how do we respond? So when we talk about redistribution, redistributing the land is one thing. But of course, the Africans have been dispossessed of this land for centuries now, right? So we also need to look at what sustainable transformation would look like. Is there going to be financing for these landowners, who are getting their land returned to them? Is there going to be training to make sure that their ability to continue to produce food does not get negatively impacted? What are we doing in terms of access to markets and agricultural support systems? So without this, it's one thing to talk about redistribution, but then that can also collapse production, which then hurts the people, right? You're creating more poverty, more. So it's very complicated for sure. And of course, we see that one of the things that's pushing Zimbabwe to rolling back the changes that Mugabe made, whether you agree with them or not, which, when is it ever a bad thing to return stolen goods to the original owners? But the thing that is pushing Zimbabwe now, the current government, to reverse course is their concern about re-engaging with international financial markets and quote unquote economic normalization, their words, not ours, and improving investor confidence, because we continue to be dependent on external factors that we don't control. And so again, with this story and with so many of the other articles we're going to look at, Africa has to turn inwards, because truly everything that we need is within the continent itself. And if we strengthen ourselves by unifying, then that also gives us more leverage, if you will, when we go to have conversations with these outside entities who will never, ever be about your own autonomy, because your autonomy threatens their existence, period, in their mind.
True.
So, that's my take on it.
Okay, so if you were to look at the points highlighted there are 4 points there. It says Zimbabwe is returning several foreign-owned farms. On women and resistance, we did an episode on Nehanda. For those who are unaware, Nehanda was supposed to be the spiritual head of the resistance in Zimbabwe.
She was the spiritual head.
Yes, she was the spiritual head, yes. And of the resistance against the colonial land grab led then by Cecil Rhodes' company, who had gotten concessions from the British Imperial Court to go in and grab land, as it were. People can read up the story by Ambassador Arikana in her book, Africa 101. That is a very good book on what transpired. You would see the level of depravity of the British in, quote unquote, pacifying the local population in Zimbabwe, what was then Rhodesia, and then subsequently became Zimbabwe in 1980. This story is particularly troubling in the sense that the Zimbabwe fought a war of independence, and the war of independence was straightforward. It was about readdressing the land grab to get back the lands. And there was an agreement post 1980 entered into by the British and the Americans. And it was to say that they were going to fund land purchases that will hand the land back to Zimbabweans. And fast forward 2 decades in, we're talking the 20s, and the UK government then reneged on their agreement. Now, some would argue that surely Zimbabwe could have extended the moratorium. But the problem is the people who fought for the land were basically we're dying out. And so the situation on the ground, even though the victory was won on the battlefield, because we must understand there was a war and the war was won on the battlefield, which is rather ironic as well in the sense that under Mugabe's Bush army, the resistance army, there were 2 generals. One was Tigorea. He died in the course of the war. And the other one, guess who the other one was? The other one is Emerson Mnangagwa. He is the current president of Zimbabwe. So basically, his comrades lost their lives on the battlefield. And you are now basically giving back what you won on the battlefield against the very wishes of what your comrades laid their lives down for. So some would argue, why is he doing it? Okay, there were 2 reasons. In 2022, his wife and himself were sanctioned by the United States. And again, it goes back to this idea of, which you alluded to earlier, your agency is not to be respected. You cannot be allowed to be autonomous. You have to be beholden to the West. Yeah. And so, which lends us to which I think in a way they're trying to soften the story by saying both black-owned 840 and white-owned about 400 farms are being returned. Why do you forget the fact? Are we supposed to forget that white-owned farms are basically commercial farms? Zimbabwe was considered one of the food baskets of Africa. We can produce food ourselves. We don't need the West to teach us how to farm. We've been doing it and the worst part is those farms are worked by Africans.
Yes. Exactly. So we know that they have the we know that they have the know-how. So here's the thing: when they put in the line about farms owned by both black and white.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
individuals. We also understand that part of what has happened is even while they were supposedly returning the land to the people or returning the land to Black ownership, there were a lot of land grabs by elitist Blacks and Africans in Zimbabwe, where the land wasn't really being returned to ancestors of the original owners of the land. It was wealthy and connected Africans consolidating power and grabbing land for themselves. So, there are, again, these stories are complicated. You have bad actors who are of European descent, but you also have bad actors who are of African descent. And the ones who suffer from all of these bad actions are the everyday Africans.
I mean, what you just said now reminds me of the book by Chinwenzu, The West and the Rest of Us, Africa's Black enslavers and African elites. Every time we have a setback, it's usually because the interests of the African elites are impacted.
Yes.
He's only doing this because he's been sanctioned. Mm-hmm. I mean, Zimbabwe, during the sanction period laid on by the United States and the EU, lost between 100 and 150 billion US dollars. Mm-hmm. So if you've come out on the other side, haven't lost that, why are you going back to them? Is what I don't understand. Because I don't want to belabor the point.
There is no true and lasting African liberation without us decolonizing our minds. We keep coming back to the same issues until we re-educate ourselves and we do the work to rid ourselves of this virus of believing that white people are inherently good and their way is the only way and the best way for everything in the world. Until we can come back to our own remembrance, we will continue to make these mistakes over and over again, as we have since African nations supposedly got their independence.
Yeah, flag independence. Okay, that said, we go to the next story, which is from Radio France International, and it is that they pose a question. This is the press, a Western press. Are Mali Tuareg-led fighters terrorist or separatist? A Tuareg-led separatist group in Mali has insisted it is not a terrorist organization, despite carrying out coordinated attacks with Al-Qaeda-linked fighters that hit military targets and killed the country's defense minister last month. The group, known as Aswad Liberation Front, FLA, was formed in December 2024 seeking independence for northern Mali. There is a key part here that stood out to me. The group presents itself as a political military movement and rejects the label of being a terrorist. The quote is, the FLA is not a terrorist organization because it carries the aspiration of an entire people, Mohamed Elmadou Ramadine, the group spokesman, said in its statement. It has a political project for the self-determination of the people of Aswad. Your take?
Questions.
Oh, God.
And I wish Brother Alamadi was here because on this one I wanted to sit down and just take notes. But maybe you can be the legend and the master teacher today on this one. So I've got a series of questions. When we examine this article, can a separatist movement remain legitimate once it aligns with Al-Qaeda-linked forces? Let's go back to what the history of Al-Qaeda is as you're thinking through that question. Another question, why is it that these extremist groups often grow fastest in regions that are resource rich? And when you think about that question, think about who's benefiting, who's funding, right? How has foreign military intervention helped or worsened Sahel instability? So we have had French troops, UN troops, all of that in these areas for how many decades? And are things getting better or are they worsening? And then I'm going to bring in my dear brother and a woman who could have become the first female president of the United States, Hillary Clinton. I've got this question. What responsibility does NATO have? What responsibility do they bear for the post-Libya instability? Because when we're talking about arms being smuggled, when we're even talking about the fact that many of the Tuareg were trained in Libya, and when Libya collapsed, they had access to a lot of guns and ammunition that then spread throughout the region. What responsibility does NATO have? Again, these external actors, these foreigners, and how it continues to impact every aspect of how we live on the continent. Can Pan-Africanism, can that coexist with these separatist movements? Because we understand that Al-Qaeda is not Al-Qaeda, however you want to pronounce it. Al-Qaeda is not really interested in the autonomy or the sovereignty of the Tuareg per se. What Al-Qaeda is interested in is spreading Islam, right? And so they target areas where there are weak institutions, where there's poor infrastructure, where there's unemployment, where you have a lot of poverty and young men and young women who are just sick and tired of how the life is turning out for them. Of course, given how these maps were drawn when Africa was carved up, you have these issues of, when you talk about the southern Mali, you're talking about a more sedentary people with different language, with different religion than the northern area where you have, quote unquote, the Tuaregs. The Tuaregs make up like less than 2% of all Malayans. And so you can see how from colonialism, you set up certain power structures that that did minimize other people, that actually did exploit other people. And then you can see how those resentments continue to linger and to grow and to cause problems today. Al-Qaeda is not interested in Tuareg liberation. They're not interested in the liberation of any African people. Their goal is to weaken African states, to expel Western influence, to replace secular governments with Islamist rule, and to build influence across anywhere that there's instability. Their goal is really long-term ideological and military control, not dissimilar from white nationalists in the United States and beyond. All of these...
that'll be...
So no magic wand can be just waved, but if both the Tuareg and all other members of citizens of Mali were clear on the sources of their issues, then there can be a real sit down and truly carving out, creating peace agreements that are equitable to everybody. And then they're working together for their common good. But this whole, the fact that the Tuareg thinking, the Al-Qaeda is going to help us gain power and then we can break away. Nah. It's that divide and conquer. Because, okay, now you break away. Now you're beholden to them. Now you're going to have a different oppressor, so to speak, if you want to consider the Mali government oppressive towards them. But I hope that the Malayan government can sit down again with the Tuaregs and whoever their leadership is and try to carve out an agreement that takes Al-Qaeda out of the equation. Having said that, when you have hungry people and you have ideology and you have guns, that is a very explosive environment to be in. Again, who suffers in all of this? The everyday people. And I have to mention this. By the way, some of you may know that I host a radio show called Rethinking Freedom. And today is Mother's Day in the United States of America. But tomorrow's show, we're going to focus on what the real origins of Mother's Day are, because it's not this damn flowers and chocolate. And I took my mother out to eat today, and tomorrow I'm going to treat her like trash. Tomorrow, I'm going to support a government that treats women and mothers like trash. So join me tomorrow for that. The reason I brought that up right now is that the people that are suffering that really have a voice in all of this are the mothers and the children. Yeah. There are men making decisions on all sides, but the people who get clubbered, the communities that are being displaced, the people who are in these refugee camps, the ones who are concerned about, how do I carry a child to term? How do I nurse a child? How do I nurture my children? Where will my children get educated? Can I feed them? It comes back to women. I'm not discounting men at all, but I'm just saying that a big burden of all of these decisions falls on the women folk.
It's born by women. So taking your questions one after the other, in terms of Al-Qaeda, so Al-Qaeda came into the lexicon of the world, we're talking between 1980, but really didn't come into the news until after September 11. So, but the basis, I mean, that's the word in itself. It's called, Al-Qaeda is the base. That's what it means in Arabic. And it was a vehicle to use to dislodge the Russians from Afghanistan. It was propped up by the Saudis, used funds and weapons from the Central Intelligence Agency And they did their job. But the caveat for them going into Afghanistan to go and fight the Russians was the moment they dislodge the Russians, they can go back to their respective countries and, quote unquote, help democratize, free their own respective countries.
Mm-hmm.
One of the key players there was Osama bin Laden. Everybody knows him. The number two was Alwana Zawahiri. He is Egyptian, and he's a heart surgeon, and he's been tortured by the Egyptian authorities and then left. One of the key things that the Americans did were after they dislodged the Russians from Afghanistan was to send the list of all their fighters to their respective governments. So the moment those people landed in their countries, they got captured. Some of them were able to escape, some of them didn't. But the ones that escaped then would come from the hardcore and then visited what they did on New York for the world to see and what have you. In terms of Africa, it's been a recurrent theme. Once France was in charge, we have to also understand that France, Britain, Portugal, Wales, a couple of other countries helped draw the maps that we currently have on the African continent. And they were very strategic about one thing. They ensured that only in a place like Botswana was there a country that only had a homogeneous composition.
Yeah.
There are Tuaregs. Yeah, exactly. So there are Tuaregs in Mali, there are Tuaregs in Burkina Faso, there are Tuaregs in Niger.
I think in Libya and
other part of
maybe a little bit of Algeria. Yes,
and Libya.
Yes. So just slice them. Yeah.
So again, exactly. So all of these countries, the maps were basically drawn by the French. And so them pushing people into various portions of the group is a way of destabilizing that country going forward.
Can I make a point really quickly?
Go on.
I know we have a lot of people in the U.S. who watch. A perfect example of what you're talking about now is what just happened in Tennessee. So you have a majority Black population in Memphis, in Shelby County. And what you do is, no, we don't want them to have any power or consolidate their power, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to split them. We're going to just carve it into 3 separate regions. So now you've got 29% of those who were in Memphis, you're now over in this section now. And now this other 28%, you're over here. And that way we dilute it and we keep you, now we have these borders drawn in the sense that keep you weakened within the larger group we've thrown you into and that don't ever allow you to come together and really have autonomy. And I point that out. I apologize for interrupting, but I just really needed to make that connection for people to see how this colonial mindset and the tools they use remain the same. Like they just keep copying and pasting through the centuries in everywhere that they are. Divide and conquer.
Yes. And so prior to the French leaving in 2022, the Tuaregs were not a major problem for Mali, but only became that recently. So which brings us back to this article. Why would a French government broadcasting organization be framing a group they previously called a terrorist organization as posing the question, are they a separatist group or a terrorist group? There is nowhere in the world where anybody will do that. If you've labeled them as such, you hold on to that tenet. And the cost of this dilly-dallying was the lives of the defense minister, Sadio Kamara, his wife, and grandchildren that were, extinguished on April 25, 2026. Murdered. Again, it goes to what these colonial powers continue to do. If they can't have access to your resources, they won't allow you to profit from it or build from it. So the case of Mali is its gold. We are going to battle you, wear you down to the point where you are going to come back on your knees to us. And they've done this in a host of ways, like you said earlier. Undermining the case of Libya. Libya was one of the most militarized states in Africa at the time. The moment you get rid of Muammar Gaddafi, you open the stores of his weaponry to any and everybody. So right now there are guns awash in the Sahel states, not for the inability of the states, which again, even most of those states are not viable, but where they try to make hay out of whatever it is they're having. But the fact that somebody wants access to their resources, which in the, to quote John Henry Clark, Africa always has something that the West doesn't want to pay for. They don't want to pay the fair price for it. And they will use you, when I say you, I'm using pejorative Africans, as a tool to undermine your very own interest. And yes, so that is one of the reasons. The last question, which is, how do we move forward from this?
Thank you so much that you were actually listening to my questions.
Yeah, listen, the comrade is not here, so somebody has to go on. So, I mean, again, it's like, how do we move away from here? The regional bodies are largely powerless. ECOWAS, in this case, Economic Community of West African States, has largely been fractured, with the Sahel states coming to fore, withdrawing from ECOWAS in 2023. We now have a problem where even if they wanted to help, they can't help because the infrastructure is no longer there. And this
wait a
plays
second. How are
into...
they going to help when there was an attempted coup in Benin and France made a call to Nigeria and Nigeria quickly went in and was able to squash that, although they will not fight Al-Qaeda in the northern part of Nigeria or deal with the instability in Nigeria. Let me see. What role is Nigeria playing in ECOWAS? Because Tinubu definitely got marching orders and resources and assistance from an external player. So I wouldn't even trust the ECOWAS, even if they hadn't withdrawn.
No, again, to be fair, ECOWAS did play a role in, restoring peace to Liberia and Sierra Leone.
Yes.
The problem we have is we now have neo-colonial leaders. We have Talon in Benin Republic. We have Asalana Ouattara in Cote d'Ivoire. And Cote d'Ivoire is essentially a neo-colonial state. It is what Cote d'Ivoire is to the French, what the Kenyans are to the British. They are their flag, it's self-evident. So as long as the present structure of Cote d'Ivoire exists, most of these countries will continue to be undermined because they're nearby. They've not gone. To quote Kwame Nkrumah in his famous speech at the OAU, they have not gone. They're still here. And the worst part is most of our leaders want to be their friends or beholden to them in the worst case scenario. So, any final thoughts on this story?
Yes, my final thought is, if you are listening to this show, first of all, like and subscribe and share. Secondly, order Adesoji's book, Africa Illuminated, because sometimes when we're talking about these countries, it might feel like, okay, these are just like floating entities out there. But if you have that book and you can actually see the map and understand the connections and the histories, it's well done. It's a quick read, gives you a quick snapshot about each of these countries. I think it will also help just in terms of understanding the geopolitical nature of many of the conversations that we're having. So I believe it's still available on Amazon, Africa Illuminated, by Adesoji Iginla. Get a copy. Get 2 copies and give one as a gift to someone.
Yep, please do. So again, we're talking about the neo-colonial structures. So for our next story, we go to Kenya. And it is from the...
You said Kenya is to Britain as Cote d'Ivoire is to France. So let's see what Kenya is doing.
Is to France, yes. Yeah. Okay. So the news story reads, the story comes from the Financial Times, and it reads, Donald Trump's Iran war withers Kenya's roses and its tea. Conflict has crushed Gulf markets and pushed up air freight and shipping costs. Once destined for Dubai, Riyadh, Tehran, Doha, the flowers grown by Ungari Mahiu on the slopes below Mount Kenya are now being fed to his ship. Since Tehran hit back by firing drones and missiles at U.S. allies in the Gulf, grounding cargo flights and closing off the Strait of Hormuz, through which booming East African trade with the region used to flow, Mahiu has been forced to jettison millions of road stems. Kenya is the 4th largest producer of cut flowers in the world and the largest exporter of black tea. Traders in Kenyan's tea, flowers, and fresh produce all suffering from the effects of the Middle East. There's the last part here. It's Mahiu who said, adding that most of the flowers from his Baraka Roses company go to wholesalers in United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. As you can see, that's his goats feasting on pretty flowers. There's a strong flower
With
culture
the
in
goats
Iran
are
itself.
eating
He
good.
said if you've they will have a flowery meat. If you're visiting someone, you take flowers. If you're waiting for someone at the airport, you take flowers. And Kenya's floral culture industry is one of the country's top foreign exchange earners, generating around 900 million annually and supporting hundreds and thousands of jobs directly and indirectly, according to the Kenyan Flower Council. So, your take.
Kenyan Flower Council.
So this,
My people,
yes,
are
this
we
story is filled
even
with roses.
serious? Are we even serious? We have a Kenyan Flower Council when people don't have food, don't have health care, don't have access to education. Are we even serious? So again,
Yeah, you must profess love.
I hate to sound like a broken record, but you again see the impact of colonialism. Because, of course, Kenyans didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, instead of using our fertile land to feed ourselves, we are going to grow flowers. They didn't make that decision. Or how much tea can you drink in a day and how much can that sustain you? We're going to take so many hectares of our fertile land to grow tea to export so that people can have their crumpets with tea. That wasn't a decision that the regular Kenyan made. That was a decision that was imposed upon them during colonialism. But the question is, independence, in quotes, because if Comrade Alamadi was here, he would say there are no independent African nations. Wouldn't disagree with him. Since independence, what have we done actively to break some of these cycles and to create a different reality for ourselves, as opposed to we will continue this dependence? And so what we see is, it's the exports of raw tea, fresh flowers, agricultural goods for others. But we're not processing, we're not branding, we're not manufacturing, we're not setting up our own logistics, right? We don't control the distribution pathways. And we don't have ownership of the transport systems. So we're growing the products and everybody else controls the profits. So they're talking about, the article said that workers may be placed on unpaid leave if the crisis continues. And this reflects a global pattern. Whenever there's a global crisis, African laborers are often the first to suffer. What do they say about when elephants fight? The grass suffers. And Africa is not doing enough to ensure that we're not constantly in the place of the grass. So our dependence has made us extremely vulnerable. What do we need to do? Because, I'm all about what are the solutions? And I'm not saying the solutions happen overnight, but if we don't start talking about them and trying to think of, instead of a freaking flower council, let us have a council to diversify our markets. Let us have a council to talk about how we build local industries. Okay, so this guy has decided rather than let the flowers rot, let the sheep eat. Well, maybe he needs to grow more sheep. Maybe that produces more for the populace. I'm just saying. What maybe we need to, and they might already have it, so no Kenyans come for me. But instead of a flower council, can we have an intra-African trade council and have some really meaningful dialogues? In fact, I was watching, happened to come across my timeline, and it was a Kenyan young lady, as a matter of fact, who was posing the question, what if we had railways that connected large cities within the same country, but then also connected each country to another country? What would that do in terms of trade for us? Instead, we build these railways that we spend billions of dollars that we borrow. We bring in the people from outside. We pay them the money that we borrow. They're charging us extra. If you've ever been in business, of course, you're going to pad your profits. Right? And then these railways, this infrastructure is just built to take things from the interior right to the port and right outside of the country. But she was saying, what happens if we actually were building something to connect us to one another? Do you know that it is cheaper for me to send books from the United States to Nigeria than from South Africa to Nigeria? Make that make sense. Because we don't even have our own airlines. How many African nations have their own airlines right now? So we've got
Just
to
maybe
reduce
2 or 3.
over-reliance on these foreign shipping corridors. And that requires a council that is not a council on flowers. I'll stop there for now. But no, let me add this. So definitely when you look at the African Continental Free Trade Area, we need to be expanding that. Talking about regional food systems, talking about African manufacturing. People, instead of going and spending all your money in Dubai and in all of the buying homes in Europe, how about you come home and build infrastructure? You know, for all my criticisms of the man called Dangote, who's the richest African, his refinery right now is a lifeline in Nigeria and beyond. The fact that he has invested in various industries within the African continent it's so essential right now. We need more to do the same.
Yes, the case of Kenya is the history of colonialism in a nutshell. You're essentially saying people are producing what they don't need to get what they're producing what they don't need to get what they need, right? So you've got the land. You're not producing food and selling the excess. You're producing to an external market only to then buy food that you would need from maybe next door or import from Europe. And the reason I bring up that issue is this. In 2022, the last story we did in Zimbabwe, Mnangagwa and Ruto went to Russia to ask Vladimir Putin to free up grains from Ukraine.
Yes.
So that they can have grains in Kenya. I mean, make that make sense. You've got the land that can produce the same grains you are seeking from Ukraine. Why? Again, it goes back to colonialism. When Britain went into Kenya, then, as East Africa, they basically did another form of colonialism, which is the worst form, settler colonialism, which is what the people in the United States will understand when, what's it called again? Manifest Destiny?
Mm-hmm.
Moving westwards, clearing the land of Amerindians and committing mass atrocities or slaughter or genocide, whatever word you want to use. The same thing happened in Kenya. In the case that they've already tested out the idea of a concentration camp, they brought that to bear when people started pushing back against what the British were doing, which was the British were bringing people who fought in their wars to Kenya to settle the land, as if there were no people there. And so when these people came in, they gave them 5,000 acres each.
5,000 acres.
The rest as these acres of somebody else's property.
Acres of wonderful land.
Of somebody else's property.
Somebody else's property, but and the choicest land. Yes.
Yes. So they call it, it used to be known as the Rift Valley. They renamed it the White Hills. So again, you not only steal, but you then, rename so that you hide. So you So you hide the troubles. Now, the worst part is this: 1962, Kenya got its independence. Britain was hoping to make a sort of recompense, which they didn't do in Zimbabwe, by returning the land. Kenyatta, who became the president, and cornered the land for himself. And then you begin to see the problem of African elites. Mm-hmm. And then how does it tie into this story? Most of the cash crops that Africa produces are not indigenous to Africa. Majority of it was introduced by the British, the French, and the Portuguese. Cocoa on the west coast of Africa was introduced by the British in 1897. The issue of flowers, tea, and stuff like that came from China by the British, who stole from the Chinese and brought it to Kenya. So you begin to see all of the trails of Africa's colonial history play out on a daily basis. Because why would any rational human being grow flowers as a source of income, wherein your land, if you till it properly, can produce food that will feed the entire population? So again, we're constantly, the stories would go on.
There's an Igbo proverb that just came to mind as you were talking, and it says, translation is, it's hard to translate it word for word in English, but essentially, you eat till you're satisfied before you now reach for tea. Tea is just, it's I'm satiated, like I'm actually full. And then now I'm just using this to wash it down or whatever. And so I bring that up just in the sense that, yes, to your question of growing flowers, we need to eat. We need to grow medicine that heals us. We need to, and then what do? We're using our most fertile land to grow flowers. And then to the extent that so many of us have bought into these commercialization of all of these different holidays and rituals, that then creates that market for the flowers. I mean, when I was growing up, and I'm old, but I'm not that old, I don't remember my father bringing flowers for my mother on Mother's Day. Now, Mother's Day was celebrated in a different way, and you brought yam, you brought palm oil, you brought salt, you brought onions, you brought tangible things. Because, listen, I love plants, I love flowers, I'm a gardener. Even if you take really good care of those roses, you might get a week. A little bit more than a week. And then what, right? So I actually tell people, give me a real plant instead of the flower. But the bottom line is, so many of us have bought into these notions of what love and care is supposed to look like. You know, flowers on my wedding day, flowers for my birthday, flowers for Valentine's Day, flowers for Mother's Day, whatever. And we don't even question, is this really an expression of love? Like you slapped me yesterday and today I got flowers, so I'm loved, please. So we need to also pay attention to the ways that we as individuals are buying into these ideas that have been put out there that hold up some of the decisions our governments are making in terms of our resources.
Yeah. I mean, one final point on the entire thing is we also have to understand that most of these countries are not viable because of what they produce. The cost, the price for your flowers are not determined by the seller. They're determined by the buyer. If there's no demand for it, good luck with that. And tea, like you said earlier, is not a primary
especially the
need.
way they manufacture it, not the way we used to make it, where it was actually medicinal. Yeah,
exactly. It's not a primary need. It's an excess. So you can't build an economy on an excess. I mean, come on, decolonize the mind. As the late ancestor Ngugi wa Thiong'o would say, we need to decolonize the mind and reconfigure our economic models because these are not viable, They're not viable. And so we've come to the final story for the day. Before we do that, if this is your first time here, do consider subscribing, joining the Patreon, and joining our community. On Wednesday, we'll be doing a review. The sister and I do Women and Resistance. We'll be doing a review of the last 12 remarkable women we've looked at in the back series and sort of tying them together and seeing how they all sometimes, have different ways of doing things, but, fighting the same common cause. And so that's Women and Resistance, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So join us for that.
It's a great time well. It's a great time as well for them to ask viewers to ask questions about some of the behind the scenes and the process of even telling these stories. So please join, because I'm always interested to hear your stories and your observations and your take on how we have presented the stories of these women.
Women in Resistance. And also it helps to understand what else we need to do with regards to how we need to curate the stories a lot more. That said, the final story comes from Uganda, which is, I was hoping a good comrade would be here, because this story will be up his street in light of his recent mutterings. So it's that it comes from The Guardian, and it's that Uganda copying Russia and China with new bill designed to crush dissent, says critics. A new law proposes up to 20 years in prison for promoting foreign interest and restricts those who work with or are funded by overseas partners. And the part that stood out to me here is Internal Affairs State Minister General David Muhoozi, who happens to be the son of the leader Yoweri Museveni. So the parliamentary committee on 3rd of April that the bill will strengthen safeguards against foreign influence that could destabilize national security, economic stability, and social cohesion. But critics have said that, like similar foreign law agent laws brought in by other authoritarian governments, the proposed legislation is designed to restrict civil society, media, and dissent by cutting off funding to support activities such as legitimate political opposition and holding the government to account. Passing this bill will not protect Uganda's sovereignty. It will kill multi-party funding, plunge thousands more Ugandans into absolute poverty, chase away foreign investment, and turn our country into an international pariah. Clearly, this bill is intended to stifle dissent, he said, was the last part. Yoweri Museveni has repeatedly warned against what he describes as foreign interference in Uganda's affairs, linking central actors to political unrest and efforts to influence the country's direction. Uganda is not a neocolonial, where foreign entities can dictate its path, Moreover said after the 2024 youth protest. Neocolonial, okay, I'll come back to that. Go on, sister, your thoughts.
It's like we're living in the twilight zone. I feel so
Yeah, it's like gaslit and somebody got me. Okay, so I'll wait for the sister to join. In the interim, there was a part there that jumped out of me when he said Uganda is not, new colony where foreign governments
my internet is
run the roost.
ridiculous today.
We also have to bear in mind that he is funded by the CIA to the tune of $1 billion every year, and he's saying he's not a neo-colonial state. So, sister, carry on.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is true Pan-Africanism, which is what I'm about, can never be just about protecting the state. It's about protecting African people. So yes, a government can oppose Western interference. A government can criticize and should criticize neocolonialism, although, as you just pointed out, he is the epitome of being propped up by external factors. But you can say all of those things and still be the one suppressing your own citizens. So Kwame Nkrumah once warned that post-colonial Africa risked replacing foreign rulers with local elites who inherited colonial methods of control. And that's what we see with all our armed forces and all our police departments across the continent of Africa. They are patterned after colonial forces that look exactly like the patter rollers here in the United States of America. And it's always been about the control of the regular people. And so on the one hand, I can say, I applaud him. Yes, no Western influence, but you're collecting your arms, your funding. I mean, we've covered Uganda.
Yes, sister was saying we've covered Uganda multiple times, and in the course of those stories, we've found out that not only is he funded, but the fact that his overreach is often overlooked. Why? Because for one, Uganda has sent so-called peacekeeping force to Somalia, doing for Americans' bidding, and also ensuring that there's a channel for minerals out of the Congo through the eastern side, flown to the west, unmetered as it were. And that way, you constantly have this turnaround. And for Yoweri Museveni, who has just won his most recent election, in inverted commas. And the West has not broached the idea that, listen, this is way too much. The suppression, the undermining of the election is way too crazy. And he's been able to literally get away with it to the point where his opponent, Bobby Wine, has had to flee the country due to the level of suppression. Goes to tell you that this bill coming through is further to shore up his power. And the only reason why these leaders make laws like this is because they realize they no longer function on behalf of the people. And once their interest is interwoven with the interest of external bodies, they can literally get away with murder. In his case, it's literally done a couple of times. So that said, I think sister is struggling to get back. And on that note, we have come to the end of this week's episode. But before I go, I'd like to remind our listeners and audience that on Wednesday, we'll be having Women in Resistance, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Wednesday. But this week, we're looking at the previous 12 women we've looked at. And on May 30, we're going to host another episode of Griot and Books, where we're going to be looking at Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and that is going to be the read. We're going to review it. The sister and I are going to have guests who are going to help understand this book, put it into context for 2026 and help make sense of what the great Chinua Achebe was trying to ensure that we get in the course of our lives from this book, Things Fall Apart. So Griot and Books is going to be on Saturday, May 30, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on this channel and under the banner of Griot and Books. That's Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And again, on Wednesday, it's going to be Women and Resistance. And so with that said, thank you all for coming through. Again, if this is your first time of coming, do like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of our episodes. Yeah, thank you all for coming through. Until next week, it's good night and God bless. That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review Podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.